Our moderator this evening will be Cindy Candela, and she will get started with a panel dialogue right after our speakers tonight. So please join me in welcoming David Johnson and Larry Fromm with Achates Power. Gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Working? Great. Perfect. Electronics aren't my thing. I'm a mechanical engineer. So before I get started, I want to thank MIT Enterprise Forum and Connect and our sponsor, Knoby Martins, for having us here today. It's a great pleasure for myself and Larry to be able to tell you about Achates Power and really to get the sage advice of the panel that's been assembled for us. I'm really excited to have the discussion and get the feedback and counsel on the challenges we face. I mean, they're real challenges. We didn't make these up just for the event. And then one more kind of introductory comment. Today in the audience is Jim Lemke, the founder of our company. So really what you're going to hear about today is really the middle of our company. But Larry and I wouldn't be here today, wouldn't be talking about these challenges if it hadn't been for Jim and the inspiration he had back in 1998. And so I won't go into the detail, but I would like to recognize Dr. Lemke. So the presentation we have for you is just a brief introduction of the company and kind of what we're doing, and then Larry's going to talk about our challenges, and then we'll have the panel discussion. To get going, just the background on the company, we've been, Jim started in 1998 with the idea, but in 2004 he decided, hey, it's time to form a company because this is a good idea. I joined the company in 2008 saying, yeah, this is a really good idea. We're very well supported. We've raised over $90 million in capital. We've put that to good use, we believe, and we've developed a technology which really is going to revolutionize the world. And we're on the commercialization phase today, and so the issues we're going to talk about are commercialization related. We have, just down the road in Sorrento Valley, state-of-the-art facilities. One of the things that really impressed me when I met Jim was that his idea was, if we need it, we're going to get it. And so we financed the company so we can do that. The engine business is not a capital-intensive business. It is capital-intensive. You have to have the tools and state-of-the-art technology in order to apply these waters. And so we do. We really have labs that are rivaled by none in the industry. At this point in time, we've run our engines in our lab for over 5,000 hours. So the first engine we ran was in June of 2005. And when I left the test cell today, or left the building today, the engines were running at full throttle. So that's what we do. Day in and day out. And through that work, we've demonstrated that the technology we've developed is, in fact, the most efficient internal combustion engine in the world. It's about 20 to 30% more efficient than the best diesel engines we can find in the published literature from production today, and about nearly twice as efficient as gasoline engines. So we just published a study in April of this year comparing ourselves to an engine from Cummins, and we demonstrated this 86% improvement in the miles per gallon of a full-size pickup by just replacing the engine with our engine, which doesn't take out any opportunity to do other things like reduce aero drag and all the other things you can do. Just so huge, huge benefits. And we do that without increasing cost or complexity. So the engine actually is simpler than a conventional engine and can cost less. So that's a really big opportunity in the marketplace. And I'm very proud of the way we've generated the intellectual property and protected it. So to date, we have, and today we had another patent issued today. So that's 24 US patents, over 1,800 claims, individual claims of innovations. This is the fundamental bedrock of our company. We're very proud of it. So without getting too deep in the technical mire, I do want to show you just one set of data that just kind of captures the fundamental benefits of our engine. This is a benchmark comparison that we've done of our engine technology to a leading engine that's in production today. You can buy it at your local Ford dealer. It's the Ford Power Stroke engine. It's been in production for about 3 years. It wins all sorts of awards and so forth. And our engine is demonstrated to be 24% more efficient. These two pictures, which might be hard to decipher, this picture on the top is the Ford engine. This is what we call a fuel map. So along the x-axis here, you have the speed of the engine. And along the y-axis, you have the load of the engine. So if you're just idling along, you're rolling with those low red numbers. And then the top is the maximum acceleration you can get in the vehicle. And the color indicates the fuel consumption. And so since it's fuel consumption, lower numbers are better, blue is better. And these two charts are on the same scale. And so you can see this is the world of blue, and we like this very much. Often engine guys talk about the best point. What's the best point? If I could just spend all my time at the best point, what would the efficiency be? And this metric is brake thermal efficiency. So it's basically how much work are you getting out of the engine for how much energy you're putting into it. And just energy, divide one number by the other. So 40% of the energy that goes in fuel is coming out as work here, or 41% almost. Here it's 48%. What we've done over here is tabulated 12 different operating points. The A speeds, B speeds, and C speeds are low, medium, and high speed. And then these numbers are percent load, 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. So you get 12 operating points. And then the US government, through the emissions regulations, gives us weightings. And we use those weightings to come to this 24%. So essentially, if you drove the vehicle the way the government expects you to drive it, which none of us do, but if you did, you get 25% better fuel economy. So now that's 24% versus one of the most efficient diesel engines in the marketplace. And the study we just published, we found 30% versus an engine that's not even in production yet. And that engine actually, that calibration, that work was versus a lower emission standard than is required today. And so this is where we see that our advantage in fuel efficiency is actually growing as the emission standards get tougher. That's very important for the discussion we're going to have today. The commercial relevance of this is that basically in applications where they use a lot of fuel, they care very much about the fuel efficiency. So for those of you who have a weed whacker, you don't know what the fuel efficiency of your weed whacker is because you don't care. But if you've got a Class 8 truck and you drive 120,000 miles a year and you run 6 miles per gallon, you spend $80,000 a year on fuel in the US. You might spend 150,000 euros a year in Europe, right? So it really matters every percentage point. There are fleets out there that are calculating at 3 or 4 decimal places what kind of fuel efficiency they get from this truck versus that truck, and then they buy the one that's more fuel efficient. So we put our engine in one of those trucks, just one, and we'll save $16,000 a year of operating cost savings. You do it on a fleet, like Walmart's fleet, you save $100 million a year in operating costs. Year in, year out, every year, why wouldn't you do it? If you do it on all US Class 8 trucks, these are just the tractor trailers like this one in the picture up here and this picture here, $24 billion a year, and obviously if you expand that to the world, $100 billion. And we've only talked about heavy-duty trucks. Heavy-duty trucks in the US are about 5% of the vehicles on our highways, but they consume a quarter of all the fuel. In China, they're more like a third or half of the vehicles, and they consume 2/3 of the fuel, right? So tackling trucks is the main ingredient in our business plan. So what do? We talk to companies around the world. We can name every single manufacturer of trucks and engines in the world. It's a short list. It's not a consumer good. It's a business to business. And these are basically the logos of those companies around the world. It's basically US, Japan, Europe, China, and India. Just so you know, everybody who makes engines in Brazil, there it is from somewhere else, one of these other countries. And for us, emissions is the price of entry, and actually it's a great enabler for us because the tighter the emission standard, the greater the advantage we have. It's easier for us to meet emissions than it is for a conventional engine, which I'll tell you might be shocking to all of you, but guess what? It's also shocking to the entire automotive industry. It's absolutely shocking. We spend literally months with the leading engine OEMs from these companies here, proving to them and demonstrating to them. But since we have 5,000 test hours and multiple published papers, we can prove it to them. So emissions is the price of entry, and I just want to kind of elaborate that basically you can see the emission standards already in US and Europe, for this is trucks, just an example, tends to be really, really close to zero. It's been a 99% reduction since we started this program as an industry in the US and Europe some decades ago, basically through my career. But there's a proposal now to go another 90%, which would bring us to 99.9%, so basically no emissions. It's not exactly no emissions, there's still something left. And there are other emission standards. This is for cars. And these emission standards are very, very stringent. But the good news is not only can we meet them, but again, our efficiency advantage is greater when we do meet them. At the same time, the industry as a whole in every part of the world is faced with the challenge of reducing greenhouse gases, reducing fuel consumption, reducing reliance on petroleum. And if you think just fast forward, what about when petroleum is replaced by a biodiesel or some other bioform? That's going to be more expensive. We're also going to want to reduce that. Our engine can also run on that. So this is all relevant in that regime also. This actually is the US passenger fleet vehicle average, so CAFE. It's the regular law of the land. Manufacturers must meet this limit. And I started my career in 1990. For 20 years, we did nothing. And now we have the proverbial knee in the curve. Unfortunately, we're just here. We have a huge mountain to climb. And this is where the industry is. And you can see they're going to face a big challenge in the very near future in terms of meeting this regulation. And so that really creates opportunity for us because we can help meet this regulation. In the study we just published, we can beat the 2025 CAFE regulation with our engine, and that's the only change you need to make. And the regulations around the world are on a CO2 basis as opposed to a miles per gallon basis, but they're all headed in the same direction. You better save some fuel, you better reduce CO2 regulations, or CO2 production. So this is just a simple, not so simple, but a simple picture, one picture of how the engine runs. And I'll tell you, it's not simple. It's one of the reasons this engine is not new. It's one of the reasons that the people who worked on them in the 30s, 40s, and 50s gave up, because it's not so easy to make them work. We've spent 10 years and $90 million figuring out how to make them work and put all those patents on the wall, and now it works very, very well. So we're very excited about the opportunity in front of us, but we do face some challenges. And with that, I'm going to hand off to Larry so he can tell you about the challenges.
So, the engine business is heavily regulated, and that's one issue we have, is how we should approach regulators around the world. This is for heavy-duty trucks, but there's similar issues for cars as well. You know, every time I come back from India or China, I'm really happy when I look up and I can see the sky, in the blue sky. So thank you for members of CARB that have given us this clean air, and we can go further. As Dave said, the state of California would like to reduce NOx emissions. NOx it's a shorthand for oxides of nitrogen, NO or NO2, along the x-axis here. It forms smog. We've done a great job minimizing that out of engines, but if you live in a highly trafficked area, along a heavily trafficked freeway or a port, there's still too much in the air, and we'd like to reduce that more. The challenge is, though, that there is a trade-off. As you get lower NOx, you end up getting higher CO2. You can make engines pollute less, but they're less efficient, or vice versa, make them more efficient, they pollute more. And this shows the track for a conventional engine in a truck. The actual tailpipe standard is way down here, but the trucks can emit NOx in this region here and use after-treatment equipment to reduce it to the mandated levels. The regulators cleverly set current standards right where it starts to take this knee upwards, where it's nonlinear, and every reduction in NOx gets a much higher increase in CO2. The advantage of the Achates Power engine is, first of all, we're more efficient at every point. So whatever the NOx standard is, we're going to have much less fuel consumption, much less CO2. But also this knee in the curve happens lower and is shallower. So where emission standards are today, in this particular example, we have a 12% fuel savings, 12% lower CO2. And the question is, if the regulators in the US, and California, elsewhere around the world, move the standard to be tougher, reduce NOx 50%, 70%, 90%, make the engines operate in this region, our fuel economy advantage increases. Because as Dave said earlier, the tougher the emission standards, the bigger our advantage. So it'd be in our benefit if the emission standards became tougher. It would put more motivation on the existing car and truck companies to adopt new technology like ours. Obviously, that would benefit us. It's something the regulators would like to see. Consumers would still have an engine that's more efficient than what they're getting today. They'd be saving fuel. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? But the problem is that our customers are the car and truck companies today. We're working with some of the major companies in the world. They don't like tougher standards. So if we're really aggressive and proactive about advocating for tougher standards, we anger the people that pay us every month to do work for them. So I'm interested in getting some advice on how we should handle that. Second question has to do with China. We have customers now in Europe, in the US, in India, in Japan, in China. There's some motivations for being more cautious about going in China in a big way. First is, we are still early in the adoption of this new engine. You can't see it on the road yet. It's still in the early adoption curve. Chinese companies in general are not known for being early adopters. They're known for actually being late adopters. So one question is, will we find early adopters among the major companies in China? If so, if there's a good chance of that, it's worth our time and effort. If not, we should be focusing our efforts elsewhere. Second concern about China, of course, is intellectual property. Can we protect our patents and protect our license agreements if we sign them with companies in China? The reason for going into China is naturally it's a big market. It's about almost half of the truck market in the world today and is still growing. And there's a lot of competition in China. In the US, in Japan, in Europe, in India, the market's consolidated to 3 or 4 major companies that supply all the trucks. And no one's really moving very aggressively to change their position. In China, there's at least 10 companies that want to survive the consolidation and be one of the leaders. So they may be more action-oriented, and more risk-tolerant. And so we're trying to decide how much of our resource we should be putting into China, and if we go in a big way, how we can best protect our intellectual property. That's the summary of the two challenges.
Good evening, everybody. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and put up some chairs here for the presenters. Thank you, David and Larry, very much. I know all too well the challenges that you guys are dealing with the regulations in the global engine market. So let's see. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the, what we got to do? We're getting signs over here. Good. Okay, great, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up Connie Wang, our esteemed attorney on our panel. And we have Supervisor Ron Roberts. And we have Ev Ashworth. And all of their bios are on the papers in front of you there. So we've got a list of questions here that we're going to go over tonight. We've got about 40 minutes that we can spend on just an open discussion. I'm planning on asking 3 or 4 questions that will be basically the panelists asking Achates or Achates asking the panelists. And then we'll have 10 to 20 minutes left over for audience questions. Okay? All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'd like to remind everybody, I know most of you are members here and you understand this format. We're trying to answer or stay within the 2 questions that Achates Power has asked us, which is, what is the stance we should take with regulators? And how should we approach China? Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and start with the question for the panelists from Achates Power and collected parties here that we thought would be dynamic and get the discussion going. So the first one would be, is it correct that regulators are generally looking for the best available technology when setting standards? And if so, what evidence will API need to present to convince regulators that the API engine technology is the best available? So I know not everybody is aware of all the details dealing with that, but I'm going to go ahead and start with Ron, if you're comfortable with starting off that one.
Thank you. Being the token regulator here tonight, let me see if I can put that in a context. I think we're always, and I have my California Air Resources Board hat on, we're looking to understand the technologies that are in play and the solutions that are out there. I don't think it's always finding the best available technology that drives the regulations. Because you're also looking at what is a competitive marketplace, and you don't want to knock that out of whack, so to speak. And I think if there were several solutions, several being more than one, that hit a particular performance level, then I think that could start to drive the regulations. And on the opposite of that, though, if you had one manufacturer that could meet a standard, I don't think we'd see a regulation that would be developed for the benefit of that manufacturer. That's unlikely. Tesla has been suggesting that for a long time. And I don't think you would agree that you would want their standards to be the norm. So I think that's the first thing to understand, is that that setting the regulations isn't just going and picking the best technology and then writing a rule around it, but really understanding multiple technologies that are out there and then starting to look at, in a performance way, what might the standard be that can be met economically by a range of solutions.
Great.
So at least that is addressing your first question.
Yep, great. So Ev, you have something to add to that from your perspective?
I would agree with, as that's described. I think where, in addition to Tesla, we've had people like Volvo and others coming earlier on saying, take this technology that we have, and that was back in the late 70s, early 80s. We had Honda as well. What I would add, though, is that I think the Air Resources Board, particularly in California, also has an element that's technology forcing. And we see that technology forcing it underlying a lot of their work, but not only in the automotive, but also in other areas, power generation, et cetera. So I think there's always an opportunity to share how an innovative technology can be widely dispersed and readily adopted. And I think there's always that willingness. But I think, but again, I would defer certainly that.
Okay, so in the spirit of keeping this in a comfortable discussion format, do you all have any questions to clarify anything they've?
So how far along the commercial path would a technology, even for multiple companies, or if it's technology forcing, how far along would it have to be before it would be considered for some real rulemaking? So for example, we're developing engines right now for some of the leading companies in the world. They'll be able to do vehicle demonstrations in 2 years. So at that point, they'll be able to just show how good it is. Is that the point where people start taking it, regulators or rulemakers will start taking it seriously and start considering it as a technology forcing action? Or is it opportunities to do it before then or after then?
Well, I would suggest several things. One, the supervisor is far more familiar than I, but the rulemaking process within an agency has a long tail to it, and that'll require a fair amount of action taken deliberately by staff and then also by the board. Having said that, what we have found when we're trying to introduce new technologies in other arenas is that the customer has a large say. And so if you have a robust database which supports a wide application, and the unintended consequences are understood. And I would defer it again to you further on unintended consequences. That's the worst thing. All of a sudden, you kind of go, geez, how'd that happen? So it's not just that we have a demonstrator of a technology, but we've thought through what could go wrong. And if that is understood by customers, we've had that technology in examples in coatings and some other things, where the customer is coming and saying, I like that. And we'd like to have the opportunity to apply this. So I would see it's a parallel track as a suggestion. To the extent we are bringing in it, I mean, clearly this is an innovative technology. And to the extent you're presiding that, my experience has been that you want to parallel track it.
Well, the other thing I would say is that you don't write these rules and they don't go into effect in the short term.
Right.
You can look out right now. You want to have some certainty for the manufacturers so they know what the rules are going to be. So your technology may be here today. We have to look out and say, okay, what's realistic then in terms of not only you bringing this to the market, but other people have an opportunity to meet whatever that new performance standard is going to be. And that might be several years, realistically. Because there's a lot of testing. And you'll have all your testing, they'll put it through, probably have your engines put through the paces at our El Monte test facility also. And then they'll start to think about, okay, what does this all mean? And the curves that you're showing here are pretty impressive. I wouldn't, and I'm not questioning any of that. But that's got to be verified also.
I think there's no question about the verification, and we do a lot of that. One of the things that's happening for our company right now is that work of verifying our data and doing work for the customers that Larry mentioned around the world. No manufacturer wants to indicate that they're doing that work with us for fear that it will spur their competitors to follow their lead. So we do have 2 customers that have graciously agreed to indicate they're working with us. One is the U.S. military. They don't really have anything to fear from competition, let's say.
They don't care about NOx either.
They don't care about emissions. And the other one is Fairbanks Morris, a company in Beloit, Wisconsin that's been making opposed piston 2-stroke engines for a long time. But one of the things that's playing out in the regulations, so we have this dynamic where we're doing this work, and these engines are coming. And we've identified and we're working with those early adopters. But there's a whole bunch of OEMs out there that aren't acting right now because they think they don't need to. And fundamentally, that is making all of us consume more petroleum in the long run and produce more emissions in the long run than if they recognized they had to. And so if you go to that CAFE legislation curve that I showed, there's this 2016 midterm review. So I know this is a federal legislation. There's also the CARB analogy and so forth. But the OEMs, my former employer Ford, my former employer GM, they're counting on that to bend the curve back down and release the requirement because they don't know how to get there on an economically viable basis. But this technology does. And so this is the dynamic we have right now. I had a customer in and we talked about, hey, we can meet this future regulation, we're going to publish this paper. And they said, oh, don't say you can meet it, say you might meet it, because otherwise you'll anger us. But we can meet it.
Something else?
Could I just add something?
Yes, definitely.
I'm not sure that when we're talking about the regulators, when I look at everything that you've shared with us, it seems to me that you have such a powerful argument for saving money.
Yeah.
Absolutely, no question.
I don't know that the fact that it also is good for the environment is wonderful, but I think your entree is going to be, it seems to me, the saving money, and I don't want to say anything about China, the company's the expert there, but saving money just, I think especially in China, it's going to resonate.
Yeah, so the saving money, you're absolutely right, saving money works on commercial vehicles in the example I showed, but I'll tell you, basically in the passenger car market, it doesn't work. So, all of us.
Well, I'm also thinking that trucks really is where your opportunity is going to be. And when I look at those savings for fleet savings,
it's a no-brainer.
And you're right. The regulations that are put in place, like the CAFE standards, are action-forcing events for our customers, and it's making our job easier. We have nothing to do with those CAFE regulations, but they help us.
They help us tremendously.
And right now, we spend approximately 0% of our time influencing regulators. And the question is approximately 0% the right amount? Or should it be 1%, 2%, 3%, 10%? Is it worth our effort? And that, can we move things to help us, and then it might be worth our effort, or should we just focus on the commercial the money, saving the money?
Well, I also, the Air Resources Board has some of the top minds thinking about pollution control, and you're publishing an SAE, and they're going to the conferences, but I do think 0 would be the wrong number. The other thing is your engine has a torque curve, which is desirable for a lot of people who need torque at low RPM. And so when you talk about the customer, when I was speaking to the customer, I wasn't talking perhaps the engine manufacturer, but it's the UPS, FedEx. And to have that amount of torque at that low amount of power, especially also in marine. I mean, our biggest issue in marine, again, I'm a little off topic, but it's getting stuff out to the platforms.
Good. Okay, so I think that covers that question pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and segue. I think we'll sort of concentrate, Connie, on a topic that you're going to probably be the expert on, okay? So the question is, China and India, among other countries, have some pretty significant pollution. Does API, as a small US-based company, have any hope of influencing regulations in these countries, or should it focus on US regulators at the federal and state level? So really the second part, what can they do with China?
I think that for China, small companies, especially you're based here in US, it will be very difficult to influence the regulation part in China because, everything is from up down. It's very difficult. But I think saying that, it doesn't mean a small company with advanced technologies to solve especially can solve the problem of pollution, can't do anything. I think there are some parts that you can focus on. One is to work with the US federal government and state legislation, and to push them to get some influence in China. I think from high-level part, from the US high-level government delegation, when they visit China, they can send the message to the Chinese government to take care of their situation. So basically last December when I was in China, I started coughing the second day for the whole 2 weeks when I stayed in China. And the pollution now is everywhere. It's not only in those industrial cities, but also in like Shanghai, those seaport cities. So I think government actually already realized this issue. And so for that part, I think if there's a government-to-government dialogue, and also for the US government to put some initiatives to help China in that part, to, to maybe there will be a way to promote some of the domestic technologies to China that will be efficient. Look at the situation that actually every year Chinese government has a delegation buying all sorts of products, technologies in US. I think if you guys can get on that, arena, it's very good opportunities. And then the other part is to get actively involved in some of the organizations that are very active in China, like American Chamber of Commerce, like there's a US-China Business Council based in DC. They all have offices in China. And every year, those organizations, they combine their efforts to do white paper on some of the industry situation in China, and then report back to sometimes to the Congress, and try to lobby here to push the US government to do something. So I think that can be helpful. And then the other part is to build the relationship in China, maybe at sometimes at municipal government level, at provincial level, and luckily, if you have right connection, you can build the relationship with the higher central government level. And also through the academic institutes, because I think if for technology that can be verified both in US and then sometimes through Chinese, some of those high academic institutes, it can be a shortcut sometimes. And I do learn that there are some companies with technologies, their starting point is to work with some famous universities, with some scientists, researchers, professors, and then try to influence.
Mm-hmm. Lots of information there, right? Questions?
Yeah, so what's the best way to get in contact with provincial or municipal or central government figures? I get the sense China requires you know them already.
You need introduction.
How do we find
someone
someone?
Like Supervisor Roberts.
How convenient.
And I think for that also, yeah, because I know Supervisor Roberts has lots of connections with Chinese delegations when they visit here. And I think probably he can connect you with the right business groups sometimes when they visit town. Then the other part, you could get connected with the US Embassy in China. The economic, their business consular part, they are very helpful. They try to promote, try to help US companies with their export and also the market entry into China. And also then the other part is the those organizations, like American Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the other part is you hire some, some consultants, some professionals, some people in the industry that can connect you to the right level of government agencies.
Further input?
I also have another suggestion. And what Connie was saying, I have a steady flow of people coming here from China. Don't ask why, but I do a lot of work there. Most recently was there about 5 weeks ago. And I've had at least 3 delegations that have come since I've returned. And in fact, we'll have another group. We've got, at my invitation, we've got 10 people coming from Shanghai for our biotechnology conference that will be starting in another week or so. I do have a suggestion, though, and based on some recent meetings. Dalian has established a fund. They're they put together a major capital fund, and they are looking for investments. And it could be that something like that, where you have a municipal government that's going to be directly involved as an investor. They have a $200 million fund right now, and they are, as of a few days ago, they were soliciting suggestions from me as to who they might talk to.
Should I give you my card now? It's in Chinese on the back.
The reason why I'm saying that, because that would bring a number of advantages. You'd be connected with a very strong city that is very desirous of establishing a base in knowledge-based advanced technologies, well located. They have money in the game, and I think that I don't think the regulators per se are the ones that would drive your success in China. I mean, if you look at the trucks there, I was on a remote road on one of my last trips, and it was filled with these enormous trucks that hold, I think it was 40 tons of coal.
Yes.
Now, I can't imagine the pollution that was coming out of the coal, but the pollution that was coming out of these diesel engines, there was no types of filters or anything else on them. And I would say over a 100-mile stretch, I don't think there was ever more than about a 5-second separation in any of these trucks. It was just a steady stream going in both directions. It was a two-lane highways in each direction. And I thought, oh my God, they're, just to get the stuff to market is going to kill everybody. As Connie was saying, I was there just a few weeks ago, and some of the representatives of Qualcomm who I was with showed me they have a new app. You can click on it, it tells you what the air quality is.
Yeah.
Well, the air quality, we'd be having a revolution if we had that air quality that I experienced. You feel it in your lungs. You can't, if you're there a day, you're going to know about it. And that's not even the worst if you go to Beijing in the right time of winters. But I don't see that driving, because you're so far ahead of anything they can conceive of. But I would also share with you, the largest exporter in San Diego, the largest exporter is solar industries, okay? They're not producing solar, they're producing gas turbine engines that cut down on greenhouse gas and other pollutions. And I would say without a doubt, their major market right now is probably China. The last time I was out their plant in Kearney Mesa, it seemed like every gas turbine I was seeing, at least over half of them, all had Chinese characteristics on the side of the engine. So, I think there's opportunity, and especially if you could somehow get in with somebody that has some real push, so they can say, not only does it save you money, we're cleaning up the air. And
I think that's exactly it, because basically we're quite convinced that the opportunity in China is huge and that our technology is a big enabler for what they want to do. One of the things I always think about when I'm in China or India and I see those trucks, and by the way, you still see some that aren't so good here because they're old trucks and they need to come off the highway. They don't have the right technology. But the ones in India and China are far worse by an order of magnitude. And we know, as an industry, as engineers, we know how to solve this problem. It is totally solvable. And actually, with our technology, it enables it even more, because we reduce the fuel consumption that actually pays for the componentry you need in order to reduce the emissions. In the US, when we cleaned up our cars and trucks, we just added cost. There was really no benefit to the consumer. It was just they got worse on fuel economy and they got more expensive, and everybody hated it from an industry and a consumer side. We all enjoyed it from the clean air perspective, of course. But in India, they don't need to go through that step. And in China, they don't need to go through that step. They can go straight to our technology, which saves cost, saves fuel, and reduces pollutants. And so I think you're right. It is about finding that right connection, that right spark, that right kernel that just catalyzes things and makes it take off. And we're right this close. There's only 60 of us in my company, so we got to figure out who to talk to, at which place, and making that right connection.
But you are going to need Connie to help you to protect all this.
Make those connections.
This is quite clear.
And put the agreements in place.
Sounds like there's a whole
Technology
page.
transfer, that means
Yeah.
they want to steal your technology. So, you know, you
the next
got to
question.
be aware of that. That's part of the game.
Well, actually, we'll go ahead and talk about that a little bit more. We'll stay on China for a couple more minutes. So if Achates does enter into a licensing agreement with a major public company in China, should it expect the company to comply with the agreement, right? Will it comply with the agreement? And then how can API structure that licensing agreement to help ensure the compliance?
So that's a good question. I guess here you mentioned about contract with a public company, because I think probably you also think the way that public companies work here. In China, it can be still a little bit different. There are lots of stories about how those companies become public. They basically can have 2 books, they can have 5 books, and then eventually some of the companies, they got confused themselves. Which book to use, right? So saying that, a good contract from, the answer, simple answer, it depends, because there's some technical part, the agreement, whether the agreement is good, but there's some also other parts that you have to take into consideration. So then the mindset is the business is run in a different way in China. You have to bear this in mind. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which side you are, what part you benefit from. So it's different than the way here. And so for, first of all, it is good you have a good contract. As a lawyer, I would advocate that. For the contract, there are lots of issues you have to look at. One part is, for the contract, you definitely want to have 2 versions. One in English, the other in Chinese. And then you got to have, for the Chinese version, because if you don't read Chinese, you got to find someone who is good enough to translate the legal documents into Chinese. So that can be, accurate. Then that's the technical part for the agreement. And then also for the agreement, I found lots of times in the process of helping clients that the US companies lots of times, because they feel more comfortable with the US laws here, and then they feel, the court system here is more fair, is more transparent, is better. So they would want to insist to have the governing law set as the US law, one state, which actually can have some problems sometimes in China, because China and US in the legal system, there's no treaty. So that means the US court decision can't be honored in China court system. That is one part. And then the other part is, if the business is done in China, actually it would be better to have that dispute resolution forum set in China. Now with the, in the big cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and then with some of the, those arbitration committees, it can be more efficient to set up that dispute resolution in China, so that you may have better chance to have fair treatment. So there is, for example, there is China International Economic and Trade Arbitration Committee. So on that committee, there are lots of arbitrators are actually the foreign lawyers, like US licensed lawyers in China. They can be appointed on that panel, and you have chance to choose which arbitrator you want to judge your case. So that will be better way, because the other part is sometimes also because of the concern about the corruption issues and all sorts of issues, that people won't choose that arbitration forum sometimes outside of China, say in Hong Kong or Singapore or somewhere else. But even that way, Hong Kong is still legally, is still for legislative system, is still considered as a foreign legislative system. So for the enforcement, for the Chinese court to adopt the decisions from the foreign courts, it's a long process. Sometimes it almost becomes another litigation in China.
Okay, so that sort of answers the fairness question too, right? So she gives some suggestions on, making sure that it is handled more fair, right? Any other questions in regard to that?
Assuming we structure the agreement well, and if we compare doing business with a large reputable company in China versus one in Europe or the US, for example, are our chances of getting ripped off about the same? Greater in China? A lot greater in China?
This really depends, because sometimes I know that, especially for IP litigation cases, Chinese government also want to set a role to the world, say we are trying to follow, the international fairness rule or whatever. So it really depends. Then the other part is you need to build up the kind of mechanism to protect your IP in China. It's not about litigation. Actually, lots of times, if you have a good agreement in place, it won't work. It even doesn't work here in the US. Right? So in China, lots of times, I think you need to build up the mechanism to be able to monitor how the agreement is, performed, and from all the process, instead of just let the other party to do whatever you think they will do. Lots of time they don't do it. Then the other part is, once you are getting to the litigation, you do need to find, professionals who have the good connection in China. I still think that is important.
Great, thank you.
Go ahead, Supervisor.
I was just thinking you might do a couple of case studies on two San Diego companies that have experienced some issues. Cubic Transportation Division was doing their fare collection systems, and you'll find them in Beijing and in Shanghai and a number of major cities there. You'll find them all over the world, but you'll find them in China also. And I know for a while they pulled out. They may still be out of the market. I'm not sure, but it was issues that they didn't have in Europe, but they had in China. And it might be of interest to understand actually what happened to them. And I don't want to say too much because I don't know all the details, but I did do some work with them in China at the point where they were aggressively seeking work, but also, the recent issues that Qualcomm has faced.
Yeah, do some benchmarking.
I think it's a great suggestion.
Great idea.
Great suggestion.
Yeah.
Business everywhere.
With neighbors,
and
yeah.
they still have major hurricane-level storms that they have to deal with in China.
Yeah, so maybe there's some key people that were involved in that we could get to know. Yeah, great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to the regulations question. All right, so Ev or Ron, this might be more in your area. So besides the regulators, are there other key influences that could possibly be advocates of Achates technology and help with influencing the regulations and driving them?
Well, I think
go ahead and start.
Sorry if I'm not mic'd up enough. But we have relationships now in the environmental arena are mature and dynamic. When we approach a project, the constituency that we work with is inclusive of NGOs or public advocacy groups. They're inclusive of engineering, and they also are inclusive of trade associations and others. It is not sufficient, in our view, to come and ask that a permit be accorded and you can go do what you want. It's a lot more complicated than that. Not to say it's complicated, but the constituency is very broad. So when you look at a technology that's a game changer, as I think you accurately describe here, it has features and benefits that are attractive on multiple levels. You look at field costs, and that's borne across the board among public agencies, clearly DOD. I think the Navy is probably leading the charge on alternate fuels. They're probably one of the best examples of how to do that. But then you also, so you can imagine the benefits of that technology as a game changer. And I'm not sure you go back to the Alec Guinness movie about the man in the gray flannel suit, but I think you do look at how you can find those elements throughout. The largest cost that our customers and our clients absorb after labor is fuel. So to the extent we understand that and understand how to bring that to bear, that is something that if we're going to be competitive in an international market, we clearly have to realize the benefits of our technology. That's why people are very at home investing in America, investing in our talents. We realize the benefits. So I would say as part of that process, certainly look at countries. I mean, I was in Paris. A colleague of mine is now teaching air chemistry in Paris, and their inability to see out of the Eiffel Tower is a direct consequence of diesel combustion. So I mean, if we think about, and if you think what is a linchpin in Paris, you can't see off the Eiffel Tower. People get a little upset. So again, you have a game changer. I would think broadly in terms of its applications. It's certainly far beyond that of a regulator.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add? We're good? Okay. So next question I think would be good to cover is how does the CARB balance trying to reduce the tailpipe emissions and reduce CO2 without substantial increase in vehicle cost? So what's their...
Well, given some of the hate mail I receive, we don't balance at all. But first of all, I think that's at the heart of why CARB has been successful. We're always looking at, what's the cost per ton? What is it accomplishing? What does it cost? What's the cost benefit here? And you're looking at that. If you're establishing new regulations, you want to have some kind of idea what it is going to cost. And not that means you're not going to do it. I mean, there are a lot of things that people would, I think, would disagree that we've enacted as programs that others might think, well, no, that was just too expensive, reformulated gas and other things. But I don't know that there's any simple answer to that other than I would tell you that the cost and the benefit are a huge part of the analysis that we go through that ultimately will
drive it. Okay, good. Anything else? Any other questions in that regard? Pretty simple one. Okay, good.
It's easier to ask questions than answer for sure.
Okay, so the next question I have here is Achates Power believes that they can fully meet the implemented level 3 standards in California today. And they won't be fully in place until 2025. Okay, so based on that, is the fully implemented level 3 standard going to be in place for a while after 2025? Would they be able to count on that? I know it's a long ways off, but like you were saying, so much of this, is implemented years out. Or will the tailpipe emission standard continue to go lower?
If I had that kind of crystal ball and that I could answer you with some certainty, I have a running joke with Gary Gallegos, who heads Sandag here in San Diego, that when we start looking 10 years out, we're probably going to be less than 50% right in anything we think. Mm-hmm. That's a long way in today's world. But if there were technologies that you arrived at 2025 and you find that, wait a minute, there's a number of solutions that have been out there for some time that are operative. I would guess they would probably be an effort to start on some new regulations, probably even before that. So if technology was way out in front of your regulations, there could be a catch-up period. I wouldn't expect that those regulations would remain in effect even to 2025. I'm not planning on being there in 2025, so I'm not going to worry about it.
All right, real good. Let me ask one more question go ahead.
At one point on that, a head of environmental for a very large car company once observed that the regulatory mind is never satisfied. I think as it applies to standards, it's going to go down.
Yeah, just assume it will.
When, but our technology is impressive, our integration of things, and so too bad you won't be there in 2025, but I think that certainly there's downward pressure all the time because we fail to achieve standards by a large margin in areas that are concentrated with our citizens. And it's not an issue of visibility, it's an issue of health. And we've got to be clever and crafty about doing that. And so, absolutely. And so I would say there's a great promise in that direction.
So I'm going to go ahead and ask the panel. You had some questions that you might want to ask of Achates Power as far as some further clarification to help, sort of bridge the gap of anything that might not have been answered in the presentation that would help increase dialogue as we open it up to the audiences. So I can go ahead and sort of jog your memories on some of the questions you guys gave to me. So one of them was, who are you guys' biggest competitors?
So what we find, there are other companies, small companies, trying to create the next great engine, the Slick 50 oil treatment, whatever else you might imagine. But quite frankly, when we go off to the marketplace, the large OEMs that we're trying to sell our technology to get it broadly adopted in high volume engines so it can have a real impact economically and environmentally, we find that for the most part, they believe they have the best technology in the world, shockingly. And so our competitor essentially is our customer. They've got a group of, in some cases, 500, in some cases, 5,000 engineers who are earning their wages and feeding their family based on the fact that they're developing the best technology in the world to solve the next problem. The problem that those companies have, as a broad generalization, is that they're working on conventional engines. So they're not thinking about new kinds of engines. And based on, and by the way, when I was there, I was the same way. So you have to get out of that environment and see new things like Dr. Lemke introduced to me and Larry, that there is a better way, there is something innovative that can be created. And so it's those companies, those are our competitors, is their own internal developments. And so they send their engineers here, and it is part of the dynamic problem in the sales process for us, that they have to go back and tell their bosses, well, I've been working on this for 10 years, but that thing I was working on isn't as great as what Achates Power has developed. And that's a hard message to bring to your boss. So that is part of the challenge that we face, but I would say that those are our competitors.
Okay. So any other questions from the panelists?
Yeah, could I just comment, though?
Okay.
There are a lot of solutions out there that are not made public yet. Okay?
Of course.
I had a very interesting meeting with Toyota today. And I can tell there's a lot of work being done on a lot of things.
A lot of options.
That we're not free to even talk about. But that's one of the things that makes it so interesting. That you guys have something that looks awfully impressive here. I think what you really need to, let's figure out how to get this into motion as the earliest possible date.
One of the things that's inspiring to me about what we've created is actually the economics for implementation are not so daunting. That basically the factories around the world, you can count the factories that make engines. There's not millions. There's maybe not even 1,000. There might be 800. It's not that many. And the actual cost to change them over to make our technology is relatively modest. So that's very exciting to me because there can be this massive implementation, and also the process of implementing it. I don't have to change one plant at a time. There's basically 20 companies in the world that make 70% of all the vehicles. 70% of the cars and 70% of the trucks are made by 20 companies. So those are the 20 companies that have to change, and they can all change in parallel because they each have their own engineering staff. So there's a really big opportunity, and we do see this kind of tipping point in the marketplace. It's very exciting.
Good. So one of the questions that came up was also that Cummins spends $700 million a year in R&D on these kinds of things. And wondering how you guys can innovate companies like that.
I would say for the most part, they're working on their own engines. Mm-hmm. And it's true they're spending tremendous amounts, but what they're facing, and we see this as we meet with companies like Cummins, is that they're spending a tremendous amount of effort and energy and resource, capital, human capital and financial capital, to go after very small increments of improvement. And quite frankly, the first response we get from all those kind of companies is, well, that can't possibly be true, what you're telling us at Achates Power. But luckily, we have 5,000 hours of dyno testing and 40 published technical journal papers and actual results from running engines that it does, in fact, work. So we're well beyond that. I don't believe it anymore because we can show people data. But so it is about innovation. And I think this is one thing that we're very lucky to have here in San Diego is an innovation economy. And that's why I'm happy we are here, because we really get great people who think, I can do this. And I remember a guy I hired from General Motors 4.5 years ago. He said, yeah, I think we can make this work. And it's that kind of attitude that really makes it happen. And I would say broadly in the industry, you don't get many people like that.
Okay. So let's see. I want to go ahead and change back over. Connie, this one's probably more to you as far as some of the questions that were asked before and the trust and whether if we even put a contract together, are we really going to be treated fairly and those kind of things. Is that reputation misplaced? Is it changing? Is it something that will gradually evolve? Some of the benchmarking that Supervisor Roberts, recommended, I think that would be a good thing to do to really see what the reality picture is from local companies, right? But what's your take on that?
I think it's changing. China is changing very fast. And, imagine before, probably it's fair to say before 80s, China doesn't really have, laws in place. So in the past 30 years, it established all sorts of different laws in place. And then actually for IP protection, I did some research on it. China probably has more IP laws than lots of other places. But the problem is the enforcement part. So that part is also, changing. Currently, for the current government, they're fighting against the corruption. So there, lots of high-level government officials got into trouble. And so that is one thing I think the government is trying to do. And also with the media in place, because in China, of course, there are some restrictions. Like when I'm in China, I wouldn't be able to get access to Google search. I can only get access to the Hong Kong Google search. Mm-hmm. And then there's some websites obviously I can't get on. And I know in China, there are lots of people, they have different software to help them to get on, which is not rare. Actually, lots of people have that software. It's very easy to get access to. So with those kind of media exposures, China is getting better, but still it's nothing near perfect, or the way that it's run here. So you have to, when you do business in China, you have to be aware to learn the right way to do business there. You shouldn't assume the way that it's run there. And I think also for a business, your strategy, you should adapt your strategy to that particular market. So in that way, you can do well, you can do better.
Connie, could I jump in a question? You mentioned enforcement of IP laws, and it tripped a thought in my mind that recently in China there has been an announcement or a declaration of more stringent emission standards as they recognize the air pollution, recognize that, of course, some of it's coming from coal plants, but some of it's coming from vehicles and need to address both. And so now they're implementing the standards that we already live under here, and they have an aggressive timetable to do that. But of course, if they don't enforce it, it won't matter. So what should we expect regarding enforcement? Because maybe the people who are operating the companies in China see that and say, yeah, but it's not going to be enforced, so I don't have to worry about it.
What's the reality?
Yeah, it is. I think lots of time in China there is a policy issued, and we always say in Chinese, like from the central government there's a policy, and then from the local level of the government agencies, we have a way to deal with it. That means we can get around. Yeah, that's very common. But I think for the new 5-year plan, the government is clear that they are putting some priorities in their plan. That is for the environmental issues. So they encourage all the technologies that will help the environment. For the energy efficiency technologies, they encourage that. And then there's some biotech part. So Chinese government now actually from every level, I think Supervisor Roberts probably see those delegations. One of their purpose for those delegations visit to the US is they try to attract those talents with advanced degrees with some technology innovations back to China. And actually that part is not only to those overseas Chinese. Lots of governments, municipal governments or the provincial governments, they also encourage the foreign companies with advanced technologies to set up operations in the city. And then there are lots of incentives. So actually, if the company can take advantage of that, it can be helpful. The way you look at it is sometimes, I think, for the US companies, the way you look at China market is maybe the market is special. The market is large. So you will have different strategies to handle it. Instead of just being afraid of your IP being stolen there, you maybe find some kind of way to get to access to the market. Let me share an example. I have a client who has some environmental advanced technologies, and he actually, in the first place, he tried to find a joint venture, find a company to do a joint venture, and we had very good agreement in place. But unfortunately, it didn't go through because the agreement is too good. The other party wouldn't agree because they say, there's a problem for them to follow the agreement. So it's very interesting because this client can speak in Chinese. He is a genius. He learned Chinese 2 years by himself, and then he can speak fluent Chinese. So he actually found a way. He found not those big cities, those third-tier cities. He got connected with the third-city government. And then because for his business, there is a manufacturing part. So for the local government, they need to, they want to attract the foreign companies to the city to be able to create jobs. So that falls into, and then his technology is environmental related. So that fits very well in the city's government agenda. So the city actually gave them a very good piece of land and then actually helped them build the facility, the manufacturing facilities, and there are lots of tax treatment or some kind of lease-free arrangement. And so far, I know he is very happy there.
So there's lots of approaches, right?
Yeah,
approaches
right. Different approaches.
Okay, so Supervisor, go ahead.
One of the reasons why I suggested something like Dalian, if you can get, you don't have to look at the whole market. I mean, segments of this market are very, very large. And if you had somebody that gave you some feeling, I mean, I would guess they would say, not only we want to be a partner, we want to give you the land, we want to give you all these tax benefits, we want to help you to produce this stuff right away here. I would think they would jump on it. It's hard for the average American to understand how fast things are happening in China.
Okay.
They have a long way to go, albeit, but the speed with change is incredible. It's so much different, so significantly different from what we're used to. And I'll just give you put some of this in perspective. I was in Chongqing, which is a city in the western China, big city, very big city. much bigger than you'd think a city should be. I think 31 million people, Chongqing. So population about the size of California. It's a city run by a mayor. You know, we talk about strong mayor. No, this is a strong mayor. But not too many years ago, I was there, and all their buses were diesel buses, and they have a lot of buses. The recent trip, they're all compressed natural gas buses, okay? I don't think the directive came from the federal government, although the federal government is doing everything to ask them to be sensitive, but they have a lot of leeway to how they interpret those rules and what they're going to do. But here they've changed over their bus system. In the last less than 10 years, they've built over 100 miles of heavy rail. They have the largest monorail system in the world, plus subway system. They did 100 miles. To put that in perspective, over the last 10 years, we've completed the environmental impact report for 9 miles of light rail in San Diego, and we still have a few more years to go. In the next 4 years, they will build another 100 miles in this one city. Yep. I don't know any place I don't think the United States will do 100 miles of heavy rail in the next 4 years.
Make that change.
The whole country.
Right.
But, you know, with the right, you know, if the potential there, which is what makes it so attractive, is so staggering compared to the way we normally think of doing business, that if you could establish yourself there.
Yep. So I think we're hearing, you know, with the right connections, right? The right contracts, those kind of things, right? There's a huge opportunity. So, Ev, I know you have a lot of passion about all this. Is there any comments you want to say in addition to what's already been said before we turn it over to the audience?
No, I think you're very thoughtful to decide when we make our move, how considered will we be. There's a lot of talent. I was this weekend listening to John Huntsman speak to his expertise in areas, and he exactly right. So there's a solid database of people you can work with, and a lot of successes. I also think, you look at the way Google X designs something, how's it going to blow up? And that's exactly what we can do here at Qualcomm. I agree 100% with what
Good. Okay, you guys good with us going to the audience now? Okay, great. So we have Melissa. She has a microphone here. Who has the first question? And is a question for Achates or for the panelists?
It's for the panel.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's for the company.
Okay.
You discussed the contrary effects of NOx. Is it on?
Yeah, it's on. Yeah.
You discussed the contrary effects of NOx and CO2 emissions. How does sulfur play a role, and how can biofuels combine with your engine technology to solve these problems and reduce emissions?
Did everybody hear the question? Yeah. Okay.
So internal combustion engines, ours and all the others, burn the air and the fuel that you give them. So basically, most of the sulfur comes from the fuel. So if you want to get the sulfur out of the exhaust, you have to get the sulfur out of the fuel. And this was only done, again, maybe there was some cooperation, but there was years of resistance by the oil industry to take the sulfur out of the fuel. Europe did it before we did, but now it's gone, quote unquote gone. It's down to a very, very low level. And so you don't get the sulfur out of the engine because you don't put the sulfur in the fuel. And I think it's really, that's it. Now, we have all these ships that are running on very crude fuel that has a lot of sulfur in them. And we have other plants that are running, and there's sulfur in the coal, and there's lots of other sources of sulfur. But for vehicles in the US and Europe and Japan, basically very low sulfur, almost no sulfur in the fuel, and so you don't get any sulfur coming out of the vehicles.
Biofuels.
Oh, and biofuels, basically our engine, and I'm glad Supervisor Roberts mentioned natural gas, because our engine can run basically on any fuel. And we have run it already on our labs in down the hill in Sorrento Valley on natural gas, and we demonstrate efficiency advantage when running natural gas. So this is not a problem. But fundamentally, biofuels, it's a great path forward. It's a great way to start to reduce our reliance on fossil-based fuels. But these can also be burned quite efficiently in our engine, because the benefits of our engine are fundamental to the architecture and the combustion system we've developed. It's not about the fuel per se. Right. So there are positive and negative characteristics associated with biofuels. And of course, right now, the world of biofuels is a vast array of biofuels. And what we need as engine guys is we need a very tight specification of what the fuel is going to be. So quite frankly, we need the biofuel industry to say, okay, this is the one that we can produce in volume and economically in high volume to support the billions of barrels of fuel that we're digging out of the ground right now and replace it with biofuel. And then I'd be glad to design the most efficient engine in the world to build that fuel. But if you give me 70 different fuels, it's going to be a very expensive engine to try and accommodate that wide variation of fuel.
Okay, next question. Over here.
Question for David and Lawrence. Let me get some clarification here. Do you already have an existing deep knowledge of Chinese and Indian regulatory mechanisms already?
We have customers in China and India that have deep knowledge of Chinese and Indian regulatory.
Well, what I mean, but as a company, do you? No.
No.
Do you have a large marketing budget?
No.
No. Do you have a large lobbying budget?
No.
Okay. Do you already have existing regulatory things in place in India and China to follow and implement?
No.
Do we? No.
So why are you going after those markets?
Because they're the largest in the world.
But you can't get there. I mean, if you that's the reason why you go into those markets, because you can answer yes to all of those questions. If you can't answer yes to those questions, then you don't go after those markets.
We maybe didn't explain our business model completely.
Okay.
We work with existing engine companies. We earn revenue two ways. One is we do engineering services for them, where we design engines based on our technology for them, but it's their engine. And then they manufacture it, they sell it, and we get a royalty for a license to our technology. So we have some of the largest companies in India are our customers now. They're going to manufacture the best engine in that market based on our technology, and they know the regulatory environment. They have established sales, marketing, service. And so we're also doing that with Chinese companies, Japanese companies, European companies. So the regulatory question was, can we improve our position? Can we make the other companies move faster? But we already have a good base in all those countries.
Okay. Next. Don't be shy. In the back here. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, I'm Stephanie Altos, visiting CEO. Two questions. One was for you. You mentioned you need to monitor these agreements that we discussed. And my question is, how do you monitor these agreements and then enforce them? And then the second question to you is, have you considered the possibility of creating market pull through the public, let's say in this country, for example, through a TV show like Top Gear? I don't know if you've ever watched this, but I could just see Tanner, screaming around in a, maybe in a truck or something with your engine in it and getting the word out, and next thing you know, people are talking about it and saying, we want this thing. And I guess I would really love to talk with you about, what the ROI is, how long does it take to actually amortize, when you put an engine into a vehicle without any other modifications or minimal modifications, what does this really cost, and how quickly does do the savings in fuel amortize the cost of doing that? Because that would determine obviously a lot of things, right? So
why don't we go ahead and answer that question first, and then go over to Connie. Why don't you hold the mic for a minute, just in case you have another clarifying question.
Which one first? Connie's question?
Yours. You go.
So can't wait to have our engines in vehicles on Top Gear. It will be absolute blast. Right now, all our engines sit on dyno stands, so it's in the future, and that day will come, and it will be great. It will absolutely be great. In terms of the economics, I think the easiest and most compelling way I can explain it is, I showed a picture of a Class 8 truck, a Peterbilt truck, nice yellow truck, and this idea that it saves our technology saves $16,000 a year of fuel. So it's operating cost savings for that company, that fleet, or that owner-operator who operates that vehicle. The engine in that vehicle costs about $16,000. So basically, so our engine will cost a little bit less, maybe $15,000. So it has a 1-year payback.
So how is this not a total no-brainer? I don't get that.
Well, you have the entire, so right now in the world, we're producing around 100 million engines a year for vehicles and construction equipment and all sorts of applications. And the entire industry is invested, oh gosh, what number would it be? $1 trillion maybe in the plants that make those. And yeah, they are earning about a 3% return on assets or 4%. So they don't want to invest more in the assets if they don't have to.
So that's why you need market pull, right? Because the clients need,
tremendously.
The clients need to say, hey, we need this.
That's right.
We want this because you, the manufacturers, are not paying the tremendous fuel bills here. Right. What we are, the customers. So that's why I'm thinking customer pull.
And I think that works very well with trucks, basically, because you know one Volkswagen Jetta or one Ford Focus, you know, if you save $20 a month on fuel, it's, I mean, it's, you care about other things. How many cup holders it have? Does it have a Bluetooth? That's what consumers buy. But in the commercial truck world, they're all about the fuel consumption. Right now, though, it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg, because if you're Frito-Lay or Federal Express and you go to your local truck maker and say, I want the most fuel efficient truck you can sell me with the best engine, we're not on the menu.
Not available.
We're not on the menu. So we are working to inform those constituents so they can say, hey, I want this on the menu. But it's, yeah.
But rather than going the slow regulatory route, could you not maybe partner with somebody to come up with a truck leasing company, get these things on the road, and boom, then you give the other companies a run for their money? Because now you are on the menu.
I think that was some of what the panelists were sort of saying earlier as far as the return on investment and the optimization, fuel consumption, savings. So let's go ahead and ask Connie about the monitoring, right? Okay.
Okay. Yeah, for the monitoring part, first of all, you have to have a good agreement in place. So in the agreement, you have to specify all the issues. Like if you license your technology to a Chinese company, then you should have, you know, it's specified in the agreement, like the scope of the territory they cover. And, you know, lots of those specific things you have to have in your agreement. Then also you need to have in your agreement to allow you to do some auditing, to do some, you know, checking, to do some visiting the office whatsoever. And then the other part is you need to diligently do it, because I think things happen here too. Sometimes people have very good agreements, but they work together for many years, and after a couple of years, they forget about things because the other party seems to do what they are doing. And then they don't follow up anymore. They feel comfortable with the other party doing whatever they're supposed to do. They trust them. And then they let them handle all the situation. And then lots of time that will create the problems. So you have to diligently monitor the situation, like what you agreed in the agreements, and have a good system to monitor it. Then the other part actually is, yeah, in China, because there are just lots of on-the-table deals. You know, you can't imagine. There are lots of on-the-table deals.
What does that mean?
That means people try to find a way, you know, to get away. Okay, they can find all sorts of different ways. If they can get away, they will find all sorts of different ways. Then, so for that part, lots of times for the business here, actually, when the time is right, you actually need to set up the presence in China so that you can get access to what your other party is doing. So that is also, you know, the important part. And then the other part is for the agreement, to some extent, sometimes you have to be fair, because with the currency fluctuation, with the raw materials price change, sometimes probably there will be some kind of change in the agreement, and then you should be okay with it. Otherwise, because that business doesn't make sense to some of the Chinese companies anymore, because I do have clients face that situation. They lose the, you know, suppliers in China because they just can't afford to be in the business anymore. So I think these are some of the parts.
Thank you.
Okay, and in the back here, the red shirt.
Well, you've got the incredibly innovative engine with incredibly great efficiency. So I'm going to ask you about the future. What comes after that? And I'm asking this from the point of view, a lot of the other new engine companies that are nowhere near as far along as you have, their statement about an engine like yours is, well, it's not revolutionary enough. It doesn't leave enough room for development. I'd just like you to sort of comment, how far do you think your engine could be pushed over the next 20, 30 years, starting with your, what's sort of the upper limit, and is it actually any different than these other technologies?
The way I think about that is the internal combustion engine, we've got about 140 plus or minus years on the standard internal combustion engine with a piston and a cylinder head like the ones out in the parking lot. And the whole industry will tell you that there's still life in that and that they can improve that still further. So, and as we look at technologies that are being applied to those engines, they can also be applied to our engine. So in the comparisons that we're making, we're basically using standard industry technology. So we're not using any titanium, we're not using any exotic materials or machining processes or supercomputers. It's pretty standard stuff applied with the innovations we've created to a fundamentally better architecture. So I actually think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, and one of the things that we see in our labs as we do the initial development is that we are still on a very steep portion of the learning curve. When I met Jim Lemke and we talked about my joining the company, our goal was a 10% improvement in efficiency, and that sounded unbelievable and quite impossible. There are a lot of, so let me finish that. And now we're at 30. And 30 while meeting the most stringent emission standards and lowering costs, so it's and. So it really has come a long way already. And so I see, but it won't take us another 140 years.
Yeah.
And I think also in that time frame, if we all have the chance to be around some hundreds of years, or if we're good historians, you realize that we went through the wood phase and then the coal phase, and now we're in the oil phase. And there's some phase in the future that some bright, innovative person in San Diego may come up with. I don't know what that is. But certainly for the foreseeable future, we can continue to improve this technology quite dramatically.
So I'm going to take one more question, and then the Achates will be here for the next hour that we have the facility open. So there'll be plenty of time for other networking and other individual questions. One more in the back.
Hi, so this is a little bit of a follow-up on the poll, but it's one that's very specific to a sector that you haven't discussed, but I know that you have experience with MRAP and the military sector. And I'm wondering, obviously, you guys, your clients are your OEM and your so in this case, it would be Navistar if you're going to use the MRAP. But I'm wondering if you guys have had any conversations with the Army Research Lab, given that any new tech that we deploy runs through them, and if you're having them do any kind of testing, because one of the polls you can get is if it is established by Army internally that you can reach these kind of efficiency standards, you're not only just pushing Navistar as an example, but Army's going to be pulling them. And what you've got in terms of, if you use the 1:29 casualty convoy ratio and assume that you've got one convoy per base per day in an operational environment, you're talking about 12 casualties per base per year, decreasing down to about 9 to 10, if I'm doing the numbers correctly there in my head. You probably want to qualify those. So are those conversations happening, and how are you guys looking at that sector specifically with these type of efficiencies, since this is a major, major push within DoD and the Pentagon and the military itself?
That's a great question.
Good question.
That's a great question.
Probably have an answer.
We have 2 engines running in our dyno right now today. One is our own that we developed to present these test results. The other is an engine for the U.S. Army. The U.S. Army issued a broad agency announcement in 2012 looking for their next generation combat engine. We won that award with our partner, AVL, which is one of the major engine engineering firms in the world. And it's a $5 million project over 28 months, and we're about 15 months into it. And it's running now, and we'll easily meet all the objectives. They wanted to reduce fuel consumption, reduce the size and weight, and reduce the radiator size, because that's a very vulnerable spot of a military vehicle. Our engine achieves all three, and again, we're going to exceed their targets. In April, the Army announced at a public meeting that they're going to extend that contract to a $92 million contract, sole source, they're going to extend the existing contract to build a 1,500 horsepower engine for some of the large military vehicles for precisely the reasons you outlined. And in July 15th, we'll be hosting a very large contingent of Army personnel here at the DoubleTree Del Mar as they come out to take a look at this engine. The Army is centering their engine strategy for the next 30 years around our technology.
That's exciting, yeah. So I guess that's a good note to end on. I'll go ahead and turn it over. Brian, you want to have some end remarks?
Thanks, Cindy. Panel, thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to participate with us. I certainly hope that both David and Larry got what they came for. I mean, that was certainly our goal. But I have a quick question. Are we ever going to see the Qualcomm model, the Achates Motor Company? We'll build the car, prove to the world it works, and then sell it off to somebody else.
Everything's possible.
It's more rhetorical. I really didn't expect a response, but thank you.